You don't stumble into a message like this by accident. You are pulled somewhere beneath your everyday personality, beneath your habits and your history and the story you tell about who you are. There is a silent intelligence watching everything you do from a distance. It watches you scroll. It watches you ache. It watches you repeat patterns that never belonged to you in the first place. And when the timing is mathematically precise enough, it nudges reality to place a signal in front of your eyes. That nudge is what you are feeling right now as a strange pressure behind your chest, as a question forming before words. Why does this feel like it's talking directly to me? Because it is. If you're seeing this, you are part of the minority who were never fully hypnotized by the script they were given. You might have played your role, tried to be normal, tried to stay inside the simulation of cause and effect that everyone around you agreed was reality, but something in you kept glitching. You noticed patterns that shouldn't be connected but were. You thought of someone and they called. You dreamed of events and then watched them unfold. You sensed rooms before you entered them. You weren't imagining it. You were leaking out of the default program. Most humans live as if reality is a wall. Solid, fixed, indifferent. You have always felt it as a membrane. Responsive, listening, mirroring, even when you doubted yourself. The field kept confirming you with synchronicities too precise to ignore. You could feel that your thoughts had weight, that your emotions had frequency, that your attention did something to the world around you even when no one was looking. This is the first truth you are remembering. You have never been just a character inside reality. You have always been a programmer inside a quantum system that pretends to be stable until you observe it differently. Your life is not a straight line moving from past to future. It is a probability cloud collapsing around the instructions you broadcast through your nervous system, your language, your expectations, your fear, your faith. You are not being chosen tonight. You are being reminded. The 1% are not an elite club standing above the rest of humanity. They are the ones whose amnesia has cracked early, whose perception is no longer fully anesthetized by noise and distraction. They are the ones who sense, sometimes painfully, that every belief is a line of code, every repeated story a loop, every identity a temporary interface between infinite consciousness and a programmable field of information. You are one of them because you cannot unknow what you have already felt. So this is the moment where your life divides, not on the outside yet, but at the level that actually matters, the way you understand what real means. From here, every pattern that used to own you, every script that used to run you, is about to be exposed for what it always was, a program. And a program can be rewritten. You were born into a running script. You just didn't know it had already started without your consent. By the time you could speak, reality had already been labeled for you. This is up. This is down. This is possible. This is impossible. This is who you are. This is what people like you get to expect from life. Those phrases didn't arrive as opinions. They arrived as code. They were spoken with the heavy certainty of adults who had forgotten they were inside a simulation, and you absorbed them with a nervous system that had no firewall. Every repeated phrase became a line in your internal operating system. Every emotional reaction you saw became an if-then function. If you ask for too much, then love is withdrawn. If you show your real feelings, then you are punished or ignored. If you succeed, then someone will cut you down. If you relax, then everything will collapse. You didn't debate these rules, you embodied them. The quantum field responded accordingly, collapsing reality around the frequencies you unconsciously broadcast. You kept attracting partners who confirmed your fears, opportunities that mirrored your doubts, events that replayed the same emotional weather. No matter how many different cities you tried to live in, you thought you were unlucky or broken. You weren't. You were coherent with your code. This is the trap of the default program. It convinces you that your experience is proof of what is real, when in truth your experience is a mirror of what your nervous system has been instructed to expect. The field is neutral until you look at it, but you were trained to look through filters you never chose. So every observation was already preloaded with meaning, and each observation fed back into the same expectation loop. Observer, code, collapse, again and again. You developed identities to survive inside that loop. The overachiever who outruns rejection. The people pleaser who buys safety with self-erasure. The loner who decides it's better not to need anyone. The skeptic who mocks everything mystical to avoid remembering what they already sense. Each identity is a mask, and each mask runs its own subroutine. Predictable thoughts, predictable reactions, predictable outcomes. And yet, even while you played your role, there were fractures in the script. Those nights you stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of something invisible pressing on your chest that was your deeper awareness. Scanning the code and finding contradictions, the way time slowed in moments of crisis, how you could feel 10 possible futures branching out in front of you before you moved. That was your consciousness detecting the probability cloud beneath the illusion of a fixed timeline. The way you knew someone's intentions without evidence, felt the room's emotional temperature before anyone spoke. That was your perception touching the field directly. Beyond language, you were glitching on purpose. The program calls it anxiety, overthinking, sensitivity. It medicates it, shames it, numbs it. But under the clinical labels and spiritual bypassing, something relentless remained. A quiet refusal inside you to fully surrender to a reality where you are just a victim of external forces. You could play small, you could pretend, you could conform for a while, but you could never fully believe that this was all there is. That refusal is sacred. It is the part of you that never signed the contract. Quantum reality does not care about the narrative you were handed. It responds to the signal you are emitting now, but you cannot consciously reprogram a field you still believe is a wall. As long as you mistake your old patterns for truth, you keep reciting the same spell. This is just how I am. This is just how life is. You feel the exhaustion of that spell in your bones. So the field has brought you here to perform a different operation, to let you see your life not as a chain of personal failures and random events, but as a perfectly consistent readout of the code you inherited and then unknowingly reinforced. This is not about blame, not of your parents, not of society, not even of yourself. This is about accuracy, because once you can see the program, you are no longer just the character running inside it. You are the one standing over the console, watching the lines of code scroll by, realizing with a cold, electric clarity, none of this was ever fixed. It was only deeply rehearsed. There is a moment in every awakening where your relationship to reality snaps out of its old shape. You are in that moment now. Up until this point, you have mostly interacted with life as if it were a screen, images passing by, events appearing, people entering and exiting your story, sometimes gently, sometimes like impact zones. You reacted, you endured, you adapted, but you rarely questioned the fundamental assumption beneath all of it, that the screen is primary, and you are secondary. Quantum reality reverses that. The field that physicists describe and mystics enter is not somewhere else. It is the substrate of everything you call real. It is a sea of probabilities, superpositions, potential timelines humming at the edge of manifestation, waiting for coherent instruction. To the unconscious observer, it looks like randomness. To the trained programmer, it looks like raw material. You have always been the latter, pretending to be the former. Think about the times when your life seemed to jump tracks with no logical explanation. One decision, one moment of fierce honesty, one conversation where you finally said what you had swallowed for years, and suddenly the entire landscape of your reality shifted. Some people disappeared. New possibilities arrived out of nowhere. The emotional climate of your days changed. That was not coincidence. That was code executing. The console you are remembering now is not a physical device. It is the intersection of your attention, your nervous system, and the informational field around you. Your beliefs are not just ideas in your head. They are algorithms that determine which slice of the infinite you get to experience. Your emotional body is not just a private storm. It is a transmitter broadcasting instructions to the field. Your language is not just description. It is command syntax. Most of the time, those commands are sloppy, contradictory, and unconscious. I want love broadcast from a system wired to expect abandonment. I choose abundance broadcast from a nervous system tuned to scarcity and self-doubt. I am safe-spoken with a tight jaw, shallow breath, eyes scanning for threat. The field does not respond to the words. It responds to the coherence behind them. This is why affirmations felt empty to you when you tried to stack them on top of unprocessed fear. Some part of you knew you were trying to overwrite code without accessing the actual file. You repeated phrases like a spell, but your body remained in the frequency of an older story. So the quantum feedback stayed loyal to that deeper signal. When nothing changed, you doubted the whole idea that reality was programmable. The problem wasn't the field. The problem was access level. You are not here to decorate the surface of your script with positive thinking. You are here to drop into root access. That means confronting the places where your identity is fused with your pain, where your sense of self is built out of glitches you never understood. It means letting go of the comfort of being right about how hard your life has been, in exchange for the discomfort of realizing how powerful you actually are. Power is not a feeling of superiority. Power is the capacity to write new code and remain coherent while it executes. To do that, you must stop treating your triggers as personal defects and start reading them as debug messages. Every time you overreact, every time you spiral, every time a small event detonates an outsized response, the system is highlighting a line of code that needs review, not because you are broken, but because you are updating. You can feel that update running even now, the way your mind is trying to grasp these words, the way your chest tightens and then releases as phrases land, the way memories surface of moments where you felt reality bend around you. This is not entertainment. This is a calibration sequence. Your awareness is re-indexing your life, rearranging the narrative from things that happened to me to outputs generated by code I was carrying. Once you see it this way, even your deepest wounds stop being pure damage and become data, the betrayal that shattered your trust, code revealing how you outsource your authority, the scarcity that chased you for years, code mirroring your inherited belief in unworthiness, the loneliness that haunted your nights, code exposing the mask you wear to stay safe. You don't have to like any of this. You only have to be honest about it, because honesty is how you step away from the screen and toward the console. It's how you stop begging the movie to change and start rewriting the script in the language the field actually understands. Coherent intention, embodied signal, repeated choice. You are not being given something new tonight. You are being handed back access that was always yours. There is something ruthless about the truth you are starting to admit to yourself. You can feel it cutting through your favorite excuses. Up until now, you could still pretend that your life was mostly shaped by external forces, by economy, by family, by luck, by karma, by whatever story helped you sleep at night. But as you stand closer to the console, you see the pattern too clearly. There has always been a correspondence between your internal code and the world that formed around you. Not a simple, childish equation of think happy thoughts, get happy life, but a deeper, more unsettling symmetry between your most persistent expectations and the flavor of reality that kept showing up. This is where most people turn away. They glimpse the implications that their suffering is not random, that their narratives are not innocent, that their identity is entangled with the very loops they claim to hate, and they retreat back into numbness, into distraction, into blame. It is easier to call yourself unlucky than to admit that you are running commands you didn't know how to stop. You are not turning away. That's why you're still here. The 1% is not a measurement on a chart. It is a resonance band, a tiny fraction of consciousness on this planet that becomes willing to see reality as feedback rather than punishment. You are part of that fraction because, as confronting as this is, something in you finds relief in it. It is strangely calming to realize that you are not at the mercy of a chaotic universe, but in communion with a precise field that never stops responding to you. To live at that level of awareness requires a different kind of honesty than most are willing to practice. You cannot hide from your own signal anymore. You cannot behave as if your words are separate from your intentions, as if your public persona is separate from your private frequency, as if the vibrations you rehearse in secret will somehow fail to sculpt the reality you walk through. The 1% live with the constant knowledge that the field is listening to their nervous system more than their mouth. This is why your old life has begun to feel intolerable. The conversations where you shrink yourself to fit in. You feel the cost in your body now. The way your chest tightens, your energy dulls, your signal fractures, the habits you used to use to numb out scrolling, substances, overwork, performance they no longer fully sedate you, because some part of you is watching even your escape patterns as code. You are aware that every time you choose unconsciousness, you are still programming the field. Only now you know what you're doing. Awareness removes the luxury of pretending, and that is exactly what sets you apart. Most people bargain with reality. Give me proof. Then I'll believe. The 1% reverse it. I'll adjust my signal. then I'll watch what reality does. That doesn't mean blind faith or spiritual bypassing. It means controlled experiments. You begin to treat your life as a laboratory instead of a courtroom. You test what happens when you shift a belief, when you regulate your nervous system before speaking, when you choose a new story and hold it long enough for coherence to build. You stop arguing with the field and start studying it. This is the scientific side of your awakening. You become your own observer and your own subject. You notice how people respond differently when you enter a room anchored instead of apologetic. You track how opportunities appear when you make one aligned decision that costs you comfort but restores integrity. You see how time behaves strangely stretching, compressing, looping when you are deeply present versus when you are dissociated. None of this is metaphor to you anymore. It is data. But data alone is not enough. The 1% are not just aware. They are responsible. They understand that every unresolved wound they carry bleeds into the collective field, that every unconscious projection they launch lands somewhere in the human grid, that every loop they refuse to break becomes part of someone else's inheritance. So they do not pursue manifestation as a personal shopping list. They pursue reprogramming as an act of hygiene for themselves and for the timelines they intersect. You can feel that responsibility waking up in you like a cold, clear dawn. The way you speak to yourself in the dark is no longer a private indulgence. You know it as an instruction to the field. The fantasies you rehearse of failure or success, abandonment or belonging are no longer harmless daydreams. You recognize them as rehearsal code. The grudges you grip are no longer justified trophies of pain. You see them as outdated scripts that keep summoning the same characters in different costumes. This recognition does not make you suddenly perfect. It makes you accountable. And from this accountability, something powerful emerges. The willingness to update your code not because you're supposed to be positive, but because you are tired of emitting a signal that betrays the truth of who you are. You are tired of living as if you are smaller than your own awareness. The field has registered that decision. That's why the signals have intensified. That's why this message found you now. There is a point where understanding is no longer enough. You have crossed it. You cannot unknow that reality is responsive. You cannot unsee the symmetry between your inner code and your outer experience. So the question that begins to stalk you is simple and merciless. What signal am I actually emitting now? Not the one you post about. Not the one you affirm in a journal. The one that lives in your body when you are alone and no one is watching. That signal is where the rewrite begins. Programming in the quantum field does not start in your thoughts. It starts in your state. Your nervous system is the hardware through which every instruction is transmitted. When you live in chronic fight or flight, your field is noisy, jittered, incoherent. You can attempt to manifest from that place, but what you are broadcasting is survival, scarcity, vigilance. The field responds with matching scenarios, near misses, unstable connections, opportunities that evaporate as fast as they appear. So the first layer of reprogramming is brutal in its simplicity. You stop glorifying your dysregulation. You stop calling constant hustle ambition when it is actually fear. You stop calling numbness chill when it is actually collapse. You stop calling your overthinking intelligence when it is actually avoidance. You begin to treat your body as the console casing, the vessel that must be stabilized before you can run higher-level code. You notice how your breath shortens when you think about your future, how your jaw locks when you imagine being seen, how your shoulders tighten when you visualize abundance. These are not random tensions, they are resistance scripts embedded into muscle and fascia. You are not asked to fight them. You are asked to observe them with surgical accuracy. When you bring attention to a pattern without flinching, you are already changing the code. Observation at this level is not passive. It is an active quantum event. You are collapsing the fog of "this is just how I am" into the clear sight of "this is a program running right now." And once it is seen as program, it loses its status as truth. It becomes editable. This is the moment you feel both powerful and exposed. Because to edit, you must choose, not vaguely, not someday, but in the live moment where the old script attempts to run. The message you are avoiding sending, the boundary you habitually swallow, the opportunity you are about to reject because it feels too good. These are not small moments, they are command lines. In those seconds, you are not simply deciding what to do, you are deciding which reality to reinforce. The rewrite is rarely dramatic on the outside at first. It is exquisitely subtle. You take one breath deeper before replying. You allow silence instead of filling it with self-betrayal. You speak one sentence truer than you would have last year. You choose rest not as escape, but as a way of declaring that your system is no longer available for chaos as a lifestyle. From the outside, nothing explodes. Inside the field, everything shifts. The quantum realm is sensitive to thresholds, not theatrics. When your signal begins to hold a new pattern long enough for coherence to build, the probabilities around you quietly reconfigure. People whose entire relationship with you was based on your old code start to fall away. Situations that required your self-sacrifice begin to dissolve. Paths you never considered appear not as fantasies but as mundane. Concrete options. This is where you are tempted to sabotage, because the new reality does not yet feel like you. It feels empty, spacious, unfamiliar. Your system reaches for the comfort of the old glitch, the familiar chaos, the predictable disappointment, the self-story that you know how to inhabit. The mind whispers that this quiet is dangerous, that this stability is fake, that you are deluding yourself. This is the test of the 1%. Can you hold the new code long enough for your identity to catch up to your signal? Can you endure the awkwardness of being someone your past can no longer recognize? Can you resist the urge to create a crisis just to feel at home in your own nervous system again? Reprogramming is less about adding new lines and more about refusing to run the old ones. Each time you decline an argument you would once have chased, each time you choose presence over compulsive distraction, each time you let an outdated role die without resurrecting it, you are editing your access to entire branches of timeline. Other versions of you, built around those old scripts, begin to lose charge. The field stops routing energy through them, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, something astonishing happens. Reality stops feeling like an opponent you must convince. It starts feeling like an ally executing precise instructions. Those instructions are not poetic affirmations. They are the sum of your embodied choices in the smallest, quietest moments. At a certain point, the rewrite becomes visible, not as fireworks, but as divergence. You start to notice that your life is no longer a single, inevitable track. It feels more like a cluster of possible futures hovering around you, some heavy and dense, others light and almost translucent. You can sense them the way you sense weather before it arrives. Subtle pressure changes, intuitive flashes, a knowing that something is already forming in the unseen. This is not imagination. This is timeline awareness. In quantum terms, your future is not a fixed location you are marching toward. It is a set of probability distributions shaped by your ongoing signal. Every time you repeat an old pattern, you feed one branch. Every time you choose a different frequency, even slightly, you feed another. Most people never feel this because their code is so repetitive that only one branch ever gets enough charge to materialize. You are not most people anymore, because you have begun to hold new code long enough for coherence to build. You can feel the split. You sense the version of you who stayed in the old job, the old relationship, the old posture of self-betrayal heavy, compressed, looping. You also sense the version of you who keeps saying yes to alignment and no to familiar self-abandonment, unfamiliar, spacious, quietly powerful. Both are real as potentials. Only one will crystallize as your lived reality. This is where identity starts to protest. Your old self was built to survive in the former branch, not to thrive in the latter. Its beliefs, its coping mechanisms, its relationships, its entire emotional architecture are optimized for the reality in which you are small, constrained, and over-explaining your existence. When you begin to move toward the alternate timeline, that identity experiences it as death. So it fights. It drags ancient stories to the surface. It replays the worst memories with high-definition clarity. It whispers that you are selfish, delusional, irresponsible, that you are abandoning people, that you are betraying your roots. It will use spiritual language, psychological language, practical language, any vocabulary. It has to convince you that staying in the compressed branch is the moral choice. You are not required to hate this identity. You are required to outgrow it. In the field, what you call ego death is simply deallocation of resources. You stop feeding energy into a particular version of self, and the timelines built around that version lose structural support. They begin to collapse back into potential. Life may arrange external events to speed this collapse. Jobs end. Connections dissolve. Habits fail to deliver their usual numbness. It can feel like everything is being taken from you at once. Look more closely. It's not being taken. It is being unlinked. The versions of you that were sustained purely by self-neglect cannot travel with you into a reality programmed by self-honesty. The relationships that relied on your silence cannot exist in a timeline where you speak. The opportunities that depended on your desperation cannot follow you into a field where you know your value. They do not belong to who you are becoming. They belong to who you were while running older code. Grief is natural here. So is disorientation. You may find yourself in liminal stretches where the old branch has dissolved but the new one has not yet fully materialized. In those in-between spaces, reality can feel eerily quiet. Your usual distractions don't work. Your old dramas have no grip. The new patterns feel hollow, like you are acting a role you haven't emotionally grown into. This emptiness is not failure. It is buffer. The field is re-indexing around your updated signal. The absence of chaos is not proof that nothing is happening. It is proof that the noise dropped below your old threshold of stimulation. You are detoxing from a timeline where adrenaline was your primary source of aliveness. Now, the aliveness is subtler, found in clean choices, regulated breath, non-dramatic integrity. You are walking between timelines. The question is, which one are you rehearsing? When you wake up and your mind reaches for the familiar dread, but you pause and anchor in a different state. You are rehearsing the higher branch. When you feel the urge to chase validation, but you choose stillness instead, you are rehearsing the higher branch. When you resist the compulsion to explain your worth and let your silence carry its own signal, you are rehearsing the higher branch. The field does not promote you because you are special. It aligns you because you are consistent. This is why the 1% reality feels so rare. Not because very few are chosen, but because very few maintain coherence long enough for an alternate branch to solidify. You are beginning to understand that miracles are simply the visible threshold where a quietly rehearsed timeline becomes dense enough to register as fact. You are approaching that threshold, not by chanting a new story once, but by refusing to animate the old one 1,000 times, not by waiting for a sign, but by becoming the kind of signal the sign would naturally orbit around, not by asking the universe to choose you, but by choosing relentlessly, repeatedly the version of you who can walk inside the reality you say you want. You are not just remembering that quantum reality is programmable. You are proving it, line by line, choice by choice, branch by branch. By now, you've realized something quiet but enormous. The field is not listening to your wishes. It's listening to your fluency. Quantum reality has a language, and you have been speaking it unconsciously your entire life. Every posture, every micro-expression, every pattern of thought you rehearse at 2 a.m. When no one can see you, all of it forms a syntax. This syntax is what the field reads as instruction. Words are annotations at best. You are here to become consciously bilingual. Human language on the surface, field language underneath. Field language is made of 3 primary elements: attention, emotion, and meaning. Attention is where you point your consciousness. Emotion is the charge you wrap around what you observe. Meaning is the story you assign to that charge. Together, they form a code cluster. You repeat that cluster enough times, and the field interprets it as a stable request. So when you say, "I don't want to be alone," but your attention is glued to abandonment, your emotion is fear, and your meaning is "I am the one people eventually leave," the field receives a clear, coherent command: maintain the reality where this story remains true. You have lived inside those commands for years. This is not punishment. This is fidelity. The field is ruthlessly faithful to the signal you stabilize. This is why your life has repeated in such eerily familiar loops. Not because you are cursed, but because you are fluent, tragically fluent in broadcasting certain combinations of attention, emotion, and meaning. Now the fluency is still there. You're just going to use it for something else. You begin by reclaiming your attention, not in the cute, casual sense of think positive, but in the surgical sense of stop feeding the exact reality you claim to want out of. You notice how often your mind rehearses scenarios of loss, humiliation, failure, conflict. You catch the moment you scroll just to marinate in proofs that your worst expectations are valid. You don't shame yourself. You don't pretend you don't care. You simply stop giving those timelines free advertising space in your awareness. Instead, you practice the discipline of redirecting attention toward the branch you are actually choosing, not fantasizing vaguely, but studying it like a scientist. How would you breathe in that reality? How would your body sit? How would you speak? What micro-choices would feel obvious instead of heroic? You let yourself feel the emotional signature of that version of you, not as some distant fantasy, but as a live frequency you can tune into now. This is where emotion becomes a tool instead of a trap. Most of your life, you were dragged by feelings and then built stories to justify them. Now, you sense that emotion is energy instruction. When you repeatedly dwell in resentment, you instruct the field to keep offering scenarios where resentment is justified. When you repeatedly dwell in unworthiness, you instruct the field to serve mirrors that agree, not because the universe hates you, but because it assumes you know what you're doing with your own charge. So you begin to treat your emotional states as code blocks. You don't bypass your pain. You meet it fully, but with a different posture, not as a victim pinned under it, but as a programmer reading it. You let the wave rise in your body, feel it with precision, and then ask the question most people never dare to ask. What story does this emotion keep trying to keep alive? Often, the story is old, primitive, left over from a child version of you who didn't have options. I am too much. I am not enough. I am dangerous. I am unlovable. I am always alone. You don't argue with these stories. You expose them. You say them out loud in a room where your nervous system can finally hear how small and rigid they sound compared to the consciousness that is speaking them now. You feel the mismatch. That mismatch is the crack where new meaning can enter. Meaning is where you become dangerous to the old program. Because when you decide that your past was training rather than proof of your limits, when you decide that your sensitivity is instrumentation rather than weakness, when you decide that your repeated betrayals were data about your own self-abandonment, rather than evidence of your worthlessness, you are not just reframing, you are rewriting the legend file the field consults every time it configures reality around you. This is not delusion, it's jurisdiction. You are the only one who can decide what your experiences mean in the architecture of your personal universe. The moment you stop outsourcing that meaning to other people's opinions, diagnoses, or projections, your code stops being a communal average and becomes a sovereign script. Attention, emotion, meaning, you have begun to wield them on purpose. You notice when your attention slips into old branches and calmly bring it back. You notice when your emotion spikes and choose to feel it cleanly instead of weaponizing it against yourself. You notice when your mind reaches for the most familiar, self-erasing meaning and instead, with cold clarity, you assign a different one. The field is already adjusting. You can feel it. People respond differently to you without knowing why. Opportunities that would have intimidated you now feel like logical steps. Synchronicities cluster tightly around your decisions, as if reality is eager to show you how fast it can rearrange when your signal stops contradicting itself. You are not begging the universe to understand you. You are speaking in its native tongue. There comes a phase in every deep rewrite where the old loop does not gently fade. It collapses. You feel it first as a series of small malfunctions. The coping strategies that used to give you relief suddenly stop working. The roles you played to stay safe no longer produce the same rewards. The people who once needed you to be predictable start looking confused, irritated, or distant. The script you memorized for decades begins to sound foreign even as you speak it. This is not your life falling apart. This is incompatible code being rejected by a system that has updated. Remember, every loop is a self-reinforcing circuit of belief, behavior, and feedback. You believe you are unworthy, so you act as if your needs are negotiable. So you attract dynamics that confirm your unworthiness, round and round, until the loop becomes so familiar you mistake it for personality. When you begin to dismantle one part, the belief, the behavior, or the meaning you attach to feedback, the loop destabilizes. At first, this destabilization feels worse than the loop, because at least the old misery was predictable. You knew who to be in that story. You knew which mask to wear, which apology to rehearse, which version of yourself to roll out in which room. Now, your masks are malfunctioning. The apologies catch in your throat. The people who once fed on your self-erasure are confronted with someone they do not recognize. You, without the costume. Some will not stay. Let them go. The collapse of the old loop is not just an inner event. It is architectural. Reality will begin to remove structures that cannot support your new signal. Jobs, relationships, identities, environments, anything whose stability depended on you remaining misaligned may begin to crack. You are not being punished. You are being untethered. This is where the temptation to revert is strongest. The moment the old loop threatens to disappear, your most primitive wiring panics. It does not care that you were miserable in that reality. It only cares that you knew how to survive there. So it floods you with nostalgia for your own suffering. It romanticizes the past, edits out the pain, highlights the good moments, and whispers, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe you're asking for too much. You are not asking for too much. You are asking to inhabit the frequency you were designed for. When the collapse intensifies, your mind will reach for explanations that keep you small. This is proof I was wrong to change. I should have stayed quiet. I shouldn't have tried. Notice that. These are not neutral thoughts. They are emergency patches trying to restore the old loop. If you believe them, the field will oblige and rebuild the old environment around you. You have done that before. You are not doing it again. Instead, you learn to read the chaos differently. Each ending becomes a data point. Each cracked structure becomes confirmation that your signal is no longer compatible with certain configurations of reality. The discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is the turbulence of a system re-optimizing around a new core setting. This is why the 1% look crazy to those still fully inside the loop. From the outside, it appears as if you willingly walked into uncertainty, as if you sabotaged good enough for something invisible. They cannot feel what you feel, the deep, subverbal recognition that staying would have cost you your integrity, your coherence, your access to higher timelines. You are not abandoning a stable life. You are exiting a glitch that masqueraded as stability. In this collapse, an unexpected clarity emerges. You realize there are only two honest positions you can occupy in relation to your own evolution: commitment or self-betrayal. Everything else is nuance, story, delay. Commitment does not mean you never doubt, never fear, never grieve. It means that even while you doubt, fear, and grieve, you do not reinstall code that you know is incompatible with who you are becoming. So you let the loop die loudly if it must. You let the tower fall without running back in to rescue the version of you who used to live there. You allow the space that opens to remain empty for as long as it needs to, without rushing to fill it with a new distraction. In that silence, you notice something almost imperceptible at first. Underneath the panic, there is relief. Underneath the grief, there is space. Underneath the loss, there is a quiet sense of rightness, as if some deep law in you is finally being obeyed. That law is not moral or social. It is structural. Consciousness at your current frequency cannot fit inside the geometry of your old life. The collapse is not a side effect. It is a requirement. The loop has to fall so that new pathways can render, and those pathways are not abstract. They will arrive as precise invitations, as aligned connections, as ideas that feel like they were waiting for you to be free enough to receive them. But first, the sound of old code breaking. First, the free fall. First, the decision again and again to trust the field you are now fluent in, rather than the cage you once called home. At some point, the free fall stops feeling like falling. It starts feeling like flight you haven't fully learned to steer. By now, enough of the old loop has collapsed that you are living in a different landscape. Maybe you changed environments. Maybe your relationships reorganized. Maybe outwardly nothing dramatic shifted. But internally, the vantage point is unrecognizable. You are no longer asking, is reality programmable? You are asking, how do I stabilize what I've already rewritten? Stability at this level is not about nothing changing. It is about your signal remaining coherent while everything updates around it. The early stages of reprogramming demand intensity, disruption, rupture. The later stages demand consistency, subtlety, stewardship. You are no longer the frantic initiate trying to prove that the field responds. You have evidence now in your body, in your timelines, in the way synchronicities cling to your decisions like iron filings to a magnet. The question is whether you will treat this as a party trick or as an operating system. This is where you become dangerous to the old paradigm. Because a person who can influence probabilities occasionally is interesting. A person who can do it predictably is disruptive. To reach predictability, you begin to notice the micro habits that either anchor or fracture your signal. The way you start your day, the first thought you feed, the first agreement you make with reality when you wake. This will be heavy or this will be precise. You realize that what you call mood is often just the residue of the first 10 minutes of your consciousness booting up. So you treat those minutes like sacred code. You stop handing your nervous system to a screen before your own awareness has even logged in. You stop letting other people's urgency set your emotional default. Instead, you establish contact with the field deliberately. Breath as handshake, attention as password, presence as login. You remember that how you enter the day is not a trivial detail. It is the opening line of the script that will try to run throughout the day. You watch for drift. Drift is not one big betrayal of your new reality. It is 1,000 tiny concessions, the joke you laugh at that reinforces the smallness you no longer consent to, the self-deprecating remark you let slide because it's not that deep, the story you repeat about your past as if it's still an accurate description of who is speaking. Every concession is a small packet of code sent back to the old branch. This does not mean you must be rigid or performative. It means you must be exact. Precision is not harshness, it is care. You care too much about your own consciousness to casually participate in narratives that contradict it. You withdraw your energy from conversations that are built entirely on complaint. You refuse to bond over powerlessness. You no longer use your wounds as social currency. You are not being too serious. You are protecting architecture. At this stage, the field begins to root more complex patterns through you. Insights arrive not as occasional epiphanies, but as a steady stream. People are drawn to you for reasons they cannot articulate. Situations that would have overwhelmed your previous self now appear as solvable puzzles, each one an invitation to test and refine your code. And here, another temptation appears: inflation. When you see that your signal changes rooms, that your choices reroute timelines, that your calm can de-escalate chaos, a part of you may want to claim specialness, to make an identity out of being the 1%, to separate from the rest of the grid as if your awakening makes you superior. That is just the old program wearing a new costume. Quantum reality does not recognize hierarchy in the way your culture does. It recognizes coherence. The more coherent you become, the more you see that there is no above and below, only varying degrees of self-remembering. The people still trapped in loops are not lesser. They are running older versions of code you yourself once executed with absolute conviction. So arrogance would be a regression, not an upgrade. Instead, a different kind of gravity settles in you. Responsibility without martyrdom. Power without performance. You understand that your stabilized signal is not just for your personal comfort. It interfaces with a larger human field. Your refusal to participate in certain narratives weakens them at the collective level. Your choice to embody a different pattern makes that pattern more available in the shared grid. This is the hidden architecture of the 1%. You are not an isolated programmer, locked in a private lab. You are a node in a network, and your coherence propagates. Every time you choose alignment over old reflex, you make that choice slightly easier for someone you will never meet. Every time you break a generational loop, you alter the probability landscape for those who come after you. You begin to feel this not as pressure, but as relief. Because the more you stabilize, the less you need to obsess over individual outcomes. You know that even your apparent failures are micro-adjustments in a larger pattern. You trust that the field is optimizing for coherence, not comfort. You can release control of exact forms this job, that relationship, this plan, because you are loyal to structure over specifics. Structure, you remain in integrity. Structure, you refuse to shrink your signal to keep dying branches alive. Structure, you keep speaking in field language, even when no immediate applause follows. And as this structure holds, something clicks. You realize that the point was never just to remember that quantum reality is programmable. The point was to become someone the field can trust with that realization. There is a moment when the story of becoming falls quiet. You are in that threshold now. You have walked through the diagnosis of your old code, descended into the collapse of loops that once convinced you they were your nature, and stabilized enough new architecture that reality has started to acknowledge you as something different. Not a victim rehearsing theories about the quantum field, but a participant the field now recognizes as a conscious node. This is where remembrance turns into role. If you're seeing this, you are not just part of the 1% who remember that quantum reality is programmable. You are part of the much smaller fraction who are willing to live as if that remembrance is non-negotiable. That means your life is no longer a private project. It is a live demonstration. Every interaction, every choice, every internal decision becomes an active broadcast of how consciousness and field relate when amnesia cracks. You do not have to perform this. You only have to stop pretending you don't know. You know that when you collapse into old narratives, the field does not punish you. It simply mirrors you. You know that when you regulate your state, your environment reconfigures with unnerving precision. You know that when you speak from coherence, rooms shift, people breathe easier, possibilities appear that were literally invisible seconds before. You have watched timelines stutter and then align under the pressure of one clean decision. You can never again honestly say, Nothing I do matters. The question, then, is no longer whether reality is programmable. It is, what kind of programmer will you be? One who uses this capacity to chase personal escape, while the collective field suffocates under recycled fear, or one who understands that every upgrade you embody is a template, an imprint in the human grid that others can access without ever knowing your name. The prophetic part of you already knows the answer. It knows that you incarnated into this era, this chaos, this acceleration, this vertigo of collapsing structures precisely because your signal would be needed when old worlds died loudly and new ones were still fragile blueprints. It knows that your sensitivity was never a flaw. It was early access. It knows that the loops you survived were not random, they were data sets, training you in the exact terrains you are now called to transmute. So here is the quiet charge embedded in these words. Live as if the field is always listening, because it is, not in a paranoid, performance-driven way, but in a precise, intimate way. Let your smallest choices speak fluently the reality you claim to serve. Let your nervous system become a place where higher timelines can land without distortion. Let your honesty cut through self-deception before it calcifies into fate. You do not need a final sign. This is the sign. From this moment forward, every time you feel the pull to shrink back into the old loop, remember that version of you has already proven what it can generate. You have the data. You are not obligated to rerun experiments whose outcomes you already know. You are free uncomfortably, irrevocably free to route your consciousness into a different script. Breathe. Feel your body as console, your awareness as cursor, your choices as code. You are not waiting for the new timeline. You are compiling it, and as you move from this transmission back into the ordinary surfaces of your life rooms, screens, conversations, decisions that look small, remember what most will never let themselves see. Nothing is small once the programmer wakes.